Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Wednesday, December 4th, and today I'm making the first of a several-part series on Saturn's upcoming conjunction to the planet Pluto. Now, first I'm going to tell you about when this is happening and about how regularly these events between Saturn and Pluto occur, this conjunction. And then we're going to dive into an archetypal exploration of both Saturn and Pluto and their meeting. We're also going to look at some of the inner psychological dynamics of this transit, as well as the general spiritual, maybe some of the spiritual teachings that are going to be present at this time, I think, in a very general sense for everyone. And we'll also give a few tips on how to look for this in your own birth chart and how to interpret it in your own birth chart. So this will be part one today, but we'll surely probably be doing at least a couple more parts. I also want to announce that on Wednesday, January 8th, I am hosting a panel discussion with a group of astrologers, Becca Tarnas, Patrick Watson, Jen Zart, Sam Reynolds. Did I say Sam Reynolds already? Sam, Patrick, Jen, Becca Tarnas. Okay, so like 4 astrologers plus myself. Might even have another astrologer or 2 come out beyond that. It's going to be fun, a fun way of just sitting down collectively and hearing a group of astrologers with different experience, different backgrounds. And some of us actually were born with Saturn conjoined Pluto in the early 80s. So can speak, some people can speak to it very personally. At any rate, that's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I will have that on the events page of my website shortly. I just thought it would be a really kind of a fun way to come together as a community. And also we could just all voice our, stories and questions together and just do some reflecting. So stay tuned for information on that. Last but not least, before I dive in today, remember that I am in my fundraising stretch for the last 40 days of the year. We are at, I think it's like 230 some backers now. Let's see, what is it at? So we're on our way to 420 backers this year. That's our goal. Last year was 419. So we're, trying to get to 420 and break last year's record. We're at 240 right now today, which is fantastic. Remember that when you donate and support this work, you're making, mostly professional astrologers in this world can't continue to exist for generation after generation and pass this sacred science along unless they have incredibly busy client practices, right? They teach classes, they go on conference tours, they try to publish everywhere they can. And mostly in this sort of digital era, you're either writing books or you're doing something like I do, which is to create content year round, and then to through that content distribution to call for people to be your patrons. So people use different platforms to do that. A lot of people use Patreon. I use a Kickstarter because I just feel like it's fun to just do I always liked NPR, when they do they sort of ring the bell and do the fundraising drive to support the public broadcasting. So many thousands of people listen to my work every year. We sort of calculated how many unique viewers, listeners, readers, etc., come in contact with the astrology content that I provide year round. And it's an amazing amount of people that come into contact with it. And the point is that if you're someone who's really dialed into it and you can afford to support it, please do, because that's how I support myself, right? That's how professional astrology perpetuates itself. This is one of the newer models that professional astrologers have for making a professional life out of this. This is something I've given my full heart, my full soul to, in a sense. And so if you like it, please pitch in if you can. Pick up a reward reading when you do. Pick up hugely half off discounted tuition to my first year, my second year, or my horary certification courses that I teach, which are really fun. And I've been doing some demos about those recently. So, okay, that's my spiel. Thank you for listening. I know some of you have heard it every single day. So we have about 4 weeks left to raise the support of, get up to 420, and we're almost there. We're what, like 180 away now or something like that. So thank you. All right. So today let's talk about Saturn's conjunction to Pluto, the dreaded conjunction. Everyone is pretty flipped out about this. Honestly, like I've seen more fear about this transit than any other transit that I've ever covered in 10 years of doing this. And I think on the one hand that it's warranted. I'm not going to tell people that it's not a scary transit. On the other hand, I think that there is, like a lot of astrologers are saying right now, there's some fear mongering that goes along with it. And it's not necessary, because this transit, like all other transits, is divine. And if we have trust, faith, curiosity, heart, compassion, patience. You know, basically, if we have a little love and devotion in our hearts, any transit becomes something that we can receive directly as a gift and a blessing. It depends on us, though. We have to do that work. No one's going to do that for us. It's also healthy in this world that we live in to not deny the very nature of our material experiences. And some material experiences are rougher or scarier than others. So we don't want to try to, you know, skip over that very basic human level reality of the transits that we cover. So somewhere between ultra Pollyanna positivism. I actually watched the movie Pollyanna with my daughter. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. It's a sweet movie. So I was like, oh, it's too bad that people say that's Pollyanna positivism. She's a genuine optimist in that. So I think there's a difference though between the sort of ultra Pollyanna positivism that people try to put on, you know, Saturn and Pluto, like, oh, it's going to be great. You're going to evolve and grow, and you know, no problem. You're about to level up or something, something like that. When you're just like, you know, maybe, but you know, if I'm going to have to face plant in, you know, if I'm going to do a face plant into reality at some point during this, like, I'd also like to know, you know, so somewhere between that and like total fear mongering is where we need to land. And let's talk about the timing first. Saturn-Pluto conjunction is going to happen. I think it's between 32 and 33, no, maybe 33 and 38 years. The last conjunction was the early 80s. They last around 2 years or so as Saturn goes through the same sign, usually as Pluto. And the conjunction represents a marriage, blending, or union of Saturnian and Plutonian archetypal properties, which are heavy. Let's just put like a simple word to sum it up is that's heavy. Now, there's a lot more to it than just heavy, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The transit comes across and to conjoin very soon. It's coming, the exact conjunction takes place on January 12th. And you can see it right here. The interesting thing is that on that day, we have actually a quadruple conjunction. The Sun, Pluto, Saturn, and Mercury are all coming through at the exact same time. This is 2 days after a lunar eclipse that's taking place at the 19th degree of Cancer. So, you know, 2 days after a lunar eclipse, boom, we have this Saturn and Pluto conjunction. If you go forward, or you go backward just a little bit more into December, on December 26th, the 25th, thereabouts, we're going to see a new moon solar eclipse in Capricorn with Jupiter, who's just entered Capricorn. I did a whole video series on that if you want to check it out. So we're in eclipse season, and Saturn and Pluto are getting together 2 days after a lunar eclipse. Wow. So first of all, if you know anything about astrology already, you know exactly why people have been apprehensive about this transit for a long time. But what's, you know, is that real? How scared should we be? What is going on? What is this all about? That's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to draw on two archetypal astrologers who I really like. One is Richard Tarnas. The other is Ren Butler. I'm going to talk about two of their books and a couple of passages I'm going to read to you today. Today's reading hour. And I also am going to read you something from James Hillman, my favorite archetypal psychologist, on the nature of fear. Because one of the most classic and most basic signatures of Saturn's conjunction to Pluto is fear. So surrounding this transit, there's been a lot of fear. There's been a lot of talk about what the healthy version of fear is and what the unhealthy version of fear is. Online, when people say, oh, you know, don't fear monger about Saturn, Pluto, it's going to be like this, it's going to be good, it's going to be bad. The very fact that a conversation about what a healthy or appropriate relationship to fear looks like is already an expression of the Saturn-Pluto dynamic. So we embody Saturn-Pluto right now in the very way that we think, talk, and wonder about what will happen. That's already a sign of the heavy, sort of dark omen of Saturn and Pluto. Let's talk first about the Saturn-Pluto dynamic from one of my favorite and most loved bent-up books, Cosmos and Psyche, a fantastic book about archetypal astrology by Richard Tarnas. If you haven't read it, it's a long book. It's kind of dense. It's philosophical. If you're brave, it will change your life. Really good book. Now, so here is Richard Tarnas talking about it in a chapter called Cycles of Crisis and Contraction. This is the Saturn-Pluto dynamic. Saturn-Pluto cycles coincide with especially challenging historical periods marked by a pervasive quality of intense contraction, eras of international crisis and conflict, empowerment of reactionary forces and totalitarian impulses, organized violence and oppression, all sometimes marked by lasting traumatic effects. An atmosphere of gravity and tension tended to accompany these 3 to 4 year periods. He spreads it out a little bit farther. He gives the orb a little bit more than when I mentioned about 2 years. He gives it a little bit more. An atmosphere of gravity and tension tended to accompany these 3 to 4 year periods, as did a widespread sense of epochal closure, the end of an era, the end of innocence, the destruction of an earlier mode of life that in retrospect may seem to have been marked by widespread indulgence, decadence, naivete, denial, and inflation. Profound transformation was a dominant theme, as with the Uranus-Pluto cycle, which he talks about earlier in the book. But here the transformation was through contraction, conservative reaction, crisis, and termination. Both the First World War and the Second World War began in precise coincidence with virtually exact hard aspects between Saturn and Pluto. In August 1914 and September 1939, respectively. The most recent Saturn-Pluto alignment, which was an opposition, occurred in precise coincidence with the events of September 11th, 2001, the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York and the attack on the Pentagon in Washington, and the many events set in motion in its wake. I'm giving you an example. Now let's jump around and let's talk about the archetypal dimension of this a little bit more. As an archetypal principle, Saturn has long been associated with a complex of meanings that, while multivalent and diverse, nevertheless possess a certain easily discernible coherence and consistency. Here it is. The hard structures and limitations of material reality and mortal existence, contraction and constraint, deprivation and negation, division and conflict, gravity and gravitas, necessity and finality, the endings of things. Saturn presses things to their conclusion and defines them in their finitude. It expresses itself in such existential realities as aging and maturity, dying and death, labor and duty, suffering and hardship, the weight of time and the past, the wisdom of experience. It governs authority, solidity, security, reliability, established tradition, the status quo, order and system, that which endures and sustains. The Saturn archetype encompasses all that involves boundaries and limits, defines and grounds, constricts and solidifies. It expresses itself in discipline and control, rigor and rigidity, repression and oppression. It rules judgment, guilt, the consequences of past actions, error and fault, defeat and failure, deflation and decline, depression and sorrow. Saturn is, in Nietzsche's phrase, the spirit of gravity, both heavy and dark. In Freud's terms, it is the reality principle, the delays and resistances to gratification, the obstacles and diminishments presented by life's exigencies. Saturn is the conveyor of the hard truth, naked, unadorned, instructive, sobering, often painful. It is the bottom line, the workings of necessity, the inevitable and inescapable. So, when Saturn combines itself with a second archetypal principle, he goes on to say that it acts like this. It goes on to, it will tend to combine itself with the second principle in such a way as to express its characteristic qualities and themes of contraction, realism, division, deprivation, materiality, hardship, judgment, strict authority, and so forth, but in this case, and by means of the archetypal principle associated with Pluto. With hard aspects in particular, the Saturn principle tends to bring out the problematic potential of whatever it touches, while in other respects opposing or negating that secondary principle. Its archetypal influence seems also to be one of moving events toward critical and defining junctures. Okay. So let's take a look at, let's see, where's my next piece? So what we're saying now is that Saturn is going to impress upon Pluto all of these qualities that we've just gone through, that Saturn will kind of impress upon the Plutonian archetype its own Saturnian qualities. So here we go. Sorry guys, I lost my space. I'm going to pause my recording so I can find my space really quick. Okay, here we are. So remember Saturn empowering Pluto, Saturn combining with Pluto. Here's what he says. He says, besides this intensifying and empowering influence from Saturn, the Pluto archetype also appeared to add into the larger complex its own distinctive qualities involving instinctual and elemental forces, that's Plutonian, titanic power and violent intensity, that's Plutonian, violation and destruction, chthonic and underworld depths, and evolutionary transformation. So that's how they combine. Now, I want to show you my next favorite archetypal astrologer, Ren Butler. He's got a really good book called The Archetypal Cosmos. Check it out. Good one. Good cookbook. Principles of Saturn Pluto. Powers of intense discipline and endurance. The power, Pluto, discipline and endurance, that's Saturn. And the endurance also is Pluto because there's this regenerative force behind it. Rock solid determination and persistence. The impulse to bear down with concentrated force and pressure, deep and systematic self-exploration, a sense of ominous foreboding and darkness, inexorable decay and decline, hard labor and oppression in the psyche, unyielding force meeting implacable resistance, compulsive processes of hardening and armoring. A capacity to face problems head on, challenges which lead to an urgent reformulation of priorities, a need to cut one's losses and deepen a commitment to the important things in life, profound feelings of powerlessness along with the resolve to continue, the relentless descent into the psyche, a willingness to face every part of the unconscious despite its difficulty, completion of the death-rebirth process and owning one's shadow as an important step in ethical responsibility, deep, systematic self-exploration. The fundamental therapeutic issue shifts from how does one build a strong ego defense system to maintain the psyche's inner Cold War in a moderately tolerable manner to how does one express these titanic forces in a context which does not impinge negatively on the external world. Think about that. I'll read that one more time. The fundamental therapeutic issue shifts from how does one build a strong ego defense system to maintain the psyche's inner Cold War in a moderately tolerable manner to how does one express these titanic forces in a context which does not impinge negatively on the world? How do you hold these things that want to express themselves so tremendously and often destructively in the world? Ominous forebodings and the sense of danger, feelings of anxiety and fear, a dark and sinister atmosphere, negative or threatening forces, a perception of irrevocable pressure and change, relentless ending and breakdown, an inability of law or structure to curb decay and decline, evolutionary setbacks and reverses, crushing defeats, the limits of power. Responses of rigid armoring and hardening, circumspect defensiveness and entrenchment, compulsive defining and structuring of one's ego, reactionism and fundamentalism, some severe compression, damaging overexertion, the shadow side of ambition, the consequences of abusing power. So he goes on. That's intense, right? So intense. So is there reason to be afraid? Yes. There is in general a reason to worry because this is a transit that has to do in a very basic sense with the potential for the destruction of things that are more rigid, hard structured, traditional, that make us feel safe. And that can provoke fear. There can be an empowerment of conservative and fear-mongering qualities. Even talking about it, this transit is hard to talk about without imagining that you might scare someone. There is the potential for there to be a doubling down on things that are unhealthy, and an unwillingness to move or change that intensifies and tries to exert dominance and control even when disease is present. There is a complete resistance to change alongside of potential to to be changed against one's will. And so all of that gives us reason to be apprehensive. Some simple ways of interpreting this conjunction in your birth chart. Look for the whole sign house of Capricorn. Whatever whole sign house Capricorn occupies, the topics of that house are going to be where this contractive, transformative, and heavy energy is felt. Do all people feel it the same? No. Some people are going to have a lovely winter and nothing much is going to happen. In fact, a lot of people are. The way that it will hit us has to do with where the planets are placed in the birth chart. So if you have planets at the 22nd-ish degree of the cardinal signs of Libra, Aries, Capricorn, or Cancer, you'll be receiving a hard aspect from this. If you have if Capricorn is your 10th, 1st, 4th, or 7th houses, the angular houses, you'll feel it a little bit more intensely. If you have the midheaven, the IC, the ascendant or the descendant at the 22nd degree of Capricorn, you'll feel it very intensely. Those are a few basic things to watch for, and then you can interpret the meaning of the transit based on the topics of the house. It's a simple way of trying to delineate the transit for yourself. I recommend not freaking yourself out and talking to an astrologer if you can, someone who can be that objective balance and give you some more positive interpretations, because sometimes when we're doing it by ourselves and we hear these archetypal properties, we go, okay, like, that sounds really intense. What am I going to do with that? Okay, so at any rate, what I want to talk about today is fear, and what the role of fear plays in our lives, and why, if this transit happens to manifest in your life in a particularly powerful way, or if even hearing about it or knowing that it's coming as someone who's interested in astrology, you're dealing with fear, then what can we do with that fear? What is the purpose? What is the gift of fear? Because so many times we fear fear itself, and then we try to whitewash it. And we try to do away with it and make it into something that's comfortable. Well, that sounds fearful. Let's be positive, right? That kind of thing. That would be the extreme Pollyanna positivism that we talked about earlier. To say that it's all hell, that would also be to give fear too much power. So somewhere between trying to take away fear and giving it too much power, again, we want to come right down in the middle. And the question to ask ourselves is, how do I love fear? Where does fear play a role in the path of love? So I want to read you something that comes from James Hillman. I know I told you it was story hour today. I promised you that. This comes from an essay that he wrote called Legitimation of Fear. And it's from his uniform edition essays this one's called Philosophical Intimations. It's one of my favorite of his essays. Allow me in concluding to take another tack to try for a quite different understanding by asking again, what is the importance of fear and why is it lodged in the human soul to begin with? What is its soul status, its cosmic significance, its ultimate legitimation? My maxim now comes from a contemporary poet and novelist, Murmer Blakesley, who has studied fear concretely, very closely, as a senior ski instructor of national and Olympic ski teams. Those individuals who hurtled themselves downhill to victory or devastating injury. She writes in conclusion to her study of fear at the brink that fear, quote, presses from our limitations the aged wine of humility as we face the implacable givens of the world. Fear is implanted in our hearts and sinews. Today we must say information in our genes as a kind of knowledge, the knowledge of humility, in face of the implacable givens of the world. The aged wine of humility was the essential wisdom taught by both the Hebrew and Hellenic traditions. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, says Proverbs 1:7. Demonstrated as well a principal message of classical Greek epics and tragedies, fear urges human humility that saves from human hubris. Hubris being like pride, arrogance. The relation with the implacable givens, the gods, remember, our planets are the gods, was not love, but humility, staying within mortal bounds, drawing back that primordial physical motion which initiates reflection, reflectiere, to bend back. Let us say, fear is primordial prudence, the wisdom of animal foresight at a cellular level. Shrinking of the perimeter equals staying within limits, and this primordial prudence is given with life, as are its implacable facts. The instinctive, wordless counsel of fear acts like a guardian angel. Jewish legend says, as there are angels of grace and angels of love, so too there are angels of fear and dread. Fear as an instructive angel has been elaborated by Kemp Smith in a sort of summation by this modern philosopher soon before his death. This angel seems to offer understanding of life in the world, or what I am calling fear's cosmic legitimacy. This understanding presents itself most clearly perhaps in Buddhism, as its disciples of ritual gesture of the hands, or mudra, one of which most widely recognized is called fear not, enacted because, as a Japanese practitioner explains, fear is innate, not only in man, but in everything which exists, the birds, animals of every sort, men, the sun, the moon, the world. The worlds are continually in dread. It is this that one, the Buddhist, calls world filled with fear and dread. If fear is a potential given with the facts of the cosmos, then it is latently present anywhere, everywhere. Worlds are continually in dread. When you or I or any creature suddenly feel the presence of fear, we are placed in unmediated connection with the cosmos, engaged by the truth of reality, the truth that all things change, all things pass away, and the reliability of nothing can be assured. The keys to security lie less in calculated predictability than in the small omens of fear. For we are consumers of and consumed by the great conflagration of existence. It's like a fire. Heraclitus's fire, riding the slow, imperceptible tremors of a quaking earth. Consequently, platforms of security, appeals to moral courage, repressive combativeness to hold fear at bay, shear our wits away from the actual protective angel who keeps us, in Kierkegaard's phrase, in fear and trembling and in freedom. I love that passage so much, and here are a few of the reasons that I really like that passage. Is that fear, as the Buddhists tell us, is in everything. Fear is endogenous to this world. And so when we move through life and we think, should I do this or should I do that? And we feel apprehension about the choice or about one of the choices versus the other. That fear is a part of navigating a world in which we are mortal, in which the only necessity that we face, every single person and every single being that is incarnated, the only necessity that everyone faces is to die. And in that world where death is the only inevitable conclusion, apprehension is so much a part of how we steer the experience between birth and that inevitable conclusion. Apprehension and anxiety. Existential anxiety. It's not, you can see it in the birds. You can see it in animals. It's basic to the very sinews of our physical frame when we cross the street and look for cars coming. When my daughter is apprehensive about getting off the couch by herself as she's just learning to walk. The part of how we recognize that we are mortal, we are fragile, and our only necessity is death, eventually we all die, is through the constant, subtle, small reality of apprehension and anxiety. This is why I really appreciate that Hillman says that mentions the importance of the small omens of fear. How many times in your life have you been guided to right action and found alignment with who you are and where you're supposed to be going, whether it's a big situation or a little situation, because your little spidey senses tingle and you suddenly get apprehensive and you go, that something's not right? Kierkegaard calls it the guardian angel. Existentially speaking, fear is, in a sense, the angel that guides us through this veil of mortality. Pluto Saturn moments have to do with those moments in life where sometimes we are rudely awakened by the reality of fear that we have forgotten. We live right now, most people in the West, if you live in a house that has air conditioning, heat, and so forth, a refrigerator, Amazon Prime, we live with more luxury, opulence, and the reality of fear, death, trauma is more, it's at an arm's length. It is held at bay more so now than, as far as we know, any other time in the history of the world. We live better than kings and queens long ago did in many respects. And so, in some ways, in this modern era, the contractive moment of crisis where we are startled back awake, where the guardian angel of love comes in through fear to point us in the right direction, to remind us that our apprehension is our compass, that it's healthy, that it's okay. It happens in ways that disrupt and sometimes violate our sense of being in a secure space and bubble in opulence and comfort and ease. It's only a modern notion in many ways that we should be fearless, that we should have no connection to fear. The connection to fear and the relation to the gods was vital in ancient times. People say, oh, ancient astrology seems so negative. It seems so full of dread, or it seems to be about dark omens. Sometimes people will have that experience when they get into ancient astrology. And what I'm always helping people to remember is that actually the presence of cosmic existential anxiety is what intensifies the reality of us being living spirit souls in a mortal frame, that we are here to do something, that we have a dharma, a destiny, that fate is real, and that the only necessity that we will face, all of us, is death. That anxiety and fear, to a certain extent, and the subtle dark omens that come into our life are ways of keeping us awake, alert, and alive, remembering our eternality and remembering that our actions have consequences, and remembering that our apprehension, if we listen to it from our better self, is an angel, not a demon, if that makes sense. So fear is here to help us, but we have to be open to listening to it, and we have to be open to total devastation. A dark omen. Nobody likes a dark omen because what is it? What kind of tidings does it bring? It brings the tidings of, hello, you could, anything that you love, treasure, or value could not work out, could be destroyed, could fall apart, could be suddenly dealt a really difficult hand. Nobody wants that. Nobody likes that. But comfort in life is not our goal, spiritually speaking. Peace is not the same as comfort. And peace is not something that has an aversion to anything. Real peace is a peace that passes understanding, which means peace is something that flows through the experience of apprehension, the experience of the cosmic adjustment that we get from fear, the quickening of the heartbeat, and the sudden racing of the mind. Peace is something that flows straight through all of it. It winds through all of it. And we don't have that perspective today in many ways because we are afraid of fear. Which president was it? Was it Roosevelt? It said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. When fear becomes something that we judge, that is when it becomes demonic. When fear is something that we judge to be inappropriate, bad, a threat, etc., we are then living and locked within the framework of the mortal body. When we look at fear and apprehension as a compass guider for an eternal spiritual being within a temporary material existence, within a body that will die, we experience fear as guidance, as subtle shifting, as something to keep us in the flow of the Tao. We can't get there unless we have a healthy relationship with fear. One of the ways that that entered my life, not that I'm any master, I get afraid a lot and not in good ways all the time, but one of the things that helped me, for example, was many years working with ayahuasca. And I don't recommend ayahuasca to people. It's a very personal decision. But in these ceremonies, one of the things that happens is a tremendous amount of fear comes up inside of us. And I remember that there were certain ceremonies that I went through where I'd never been so scared in my life. And not only had I never been that scared, but I never knew that such a degree of terror was even possible. And one of the things that that impressed me about that experience was that the degree of terror that I now knew was real and possible, that was not even the beginning of it. That the extent of the reality of fear is something that is just as unfathomable as all other emotional qualities. Their depths cannot be seen, cannot be fully understood. All human emotions are like this. One of the reasons that Bhakti Yoga became such a big part of my life is that Bhakti Yoga is the yoga of marrying your marrying your emotional states into devotional practices, which is to say, we find ways of taking the depth of any kind of emotion that we're feeling and relating it back to the eternal soul and the eternal soul's relationship to its source. This is why I start with the question, how do we love fear? How does fear become and I don't mean angel in the sense of a good guy versus a bad guy. By angelic, I mean something that is orienting, that is guiding. You could think of Mercury or Hermes in ancient astrology, the escort of souls. You could think of Mercury as angelic. Of course, the Greeks had a word for this called a daimon, like a guiding spirit. Native American traditions have the idea of guiding spirits that come into our life. And as far as I can tell, when one develops a healthy relationship with any kind of totem animal or spirit, what happens is that spirit shows up in the midst of fear so that we understand that it's a messenger, not an enemy. And that's very, very crucial, because while we're in this world and we're locked into the fear of the termination of our mortal frame or anything mortal in our life, we will tend to experience fear as an antagonist. So in order to shift it, we have to understand fear as a messenger. When people have near-death experiences, what do they say? If they had a healthy near-death experience, they don't go into a traumatic response that stays stuck forever, generally speaking. They will say, it was a wake-up call, something like that. Or they'll say, that I was so humbled. We can't have, Hillman says, the other point that I really like that he says in that passage that he mentioned was that we can't have an appropriate relationship with the gods unless we learn to humble ourselves with a degree of fear and humility, gentle limitedness within the scope of reality. Today, the gospel of the new age is all about how big can you be? How empowered can you be? How sovereign can you be? The problem with these kinds of spiritual agendas is that they don't do well when devastation and destruction and the demons of fear come along. Because the idea is to empower yourself to be stronger and more in control of your reality, your existence, your state of consciousness, your feelings, etc. You're in control. You're the master of it all. And the truth is that material nature, the vast forces of the cosmos, the vast forces of the mind, of the psyche, of emotion, of experience, will overwhelm us. This is why Saturn and Pluto conjunction and opposition by Richard Tarnas are also equated with the story of Moby Dick, which came out, it was either during one of the conjunctions or oppositions, if I remember correctly, and is a story about a titanic force that is coming up from the depths of the ocean, the unconscious, to smash the man-made object, the man-made sort of titanic object, the ship of life. But it's a mortal vessel. It can't, and of course the conflict between Ahab and the whale. And in that story, if you've ever read it before, Ahab represents everything, the same kind of new age agenda. You're the captain, you're in control, you're empowered. And while there are admirable things that we can take from that narrative, like you don't need to be disempowered or beat up by life, like stepping into a sense of confidence in who you are, love for who you are, I'm all on board for that. But when it comes to, you'll notice that new age empowerment gospels are often paired with very slick marketing schemes. And you can be empowered too. Just look at how beautiful I am. Look at how sexy and spiritually enlivened I look. Look at the beautiful vegan food I'm eating. Look at the tropical paradise retreat I'm on, right? And you can be empowered as well. It's also very positive. The problem is that when devastating floods come, when the whale comes out from the deep and smashes the ship, we have no resources to call on in that moment. And it does happen. It will happen because those cycles of crisis and contraction are endogenous to reality. Fear is in everything, as the Buddhists say. The way that we navigate through this world and learn in any way is through existential apprehension, the gentle push of angelic anxiety that cannot be established within us until we recognize that we are not God and we are not the gods. We are mortals, sacred, beautiful, brilliant in our own ways, but also not the extent of the powers of the universe. And so when we have this healthy, humble, apprehensive, careful, but not timid relationship to the gods, to reality, then fear becomes an instructor. Fear is not something that we fear. Fear is something that guides us. It becomes an angelic presence. If the gospel of humility, which is a perennial gospel in all religious traditions, far more than the New Age message of be the most important, powerful, fantastic thing in the universe. When we take up the gospel of humility, which is not a gospel of self-devaluation, it's rather a gospel of being no more and no less than exactly what you are, a finite frame with an eternal being inside of it, in a cosmos that currently at the moment includes powers that are far vaster than ourselves. When we stand in that space with confidence, but simple humility at the same time, then when fear, crisis, contraction come into our life, they become our guides, they become our friends. And they become the guarantors of freedom. That's the most important thing that Kierkegaard has to say in this passage that Hillman quotes. Let me read it again, just in case you forgot. I don't remember the exact words either, so here it is. Consequently, platforms of security, appeals to moral courage. Think of how many people right now are saying, you've been wounded by life, you've been a victim, rise up, be a conqueror, be empowered, right? And there's nothing wrong with that on one level, but on the other level, it's a platform of security. Appeal to your moral courage. Be an empowered, sovereign, happy being. Your happiness, you're in control, right? Like that. To hold fear at bay, shear our wits away from the actual protective angel who keeps us, in Kierkegaard's phrase, in fear and trembling and in freedom. See, the thing is that real freedom has to do, we can't be free unless we are also within the context of who we actually are and within the context of what is actually real. So Saturn and Pluto are the contractive force of the real the reminder of cosmic apprehension that places us back into humble, simple reverence for the powers that are bigger than us. And if we allow that to happen without fearing fear, then we come into deeper, more solid, but less tangible sense of security in the world. It's not any longer attached to how great I feel or how much weight I've lost or how empowered I am or how many people are signing up for my empowerment program or whatever. Instead, our sense of being okay in reality is rooted very closely to the close shaves that we've had with our own mortality. Even if it's just irrational fear, when we've had close shaves with our irrational fear, it quiets us. It doesn't make us bolder and bigger moral heroes over the presence of fear in the cosmos. In fact, what it does is it teaches us that you become apprehensive to call anything evil. You become comprehensive to call anything good. Because in reality, you start seeing, because of having these close shaves, that things that are good are often bad and things that are bad are often good. And the closer we get to that truth, the more we feel completely secure, protected, held. We feel an unimaginable depth of soulfulness. That's Pluto. Riches, Hades, the word Pluto, Hades, means riches. But we feel it within the small confines of our limitations and our fears and our worries. We feel okay within them. There's nothing to go and morally conquer or rise above or transcend. There's nothing like that tempting us up into some display of hubris. So these cycles of contraction and crisis for Saturn and Pluto are empowering if we allow ourselves to be small, to be limited. And inside of that smallness and that limitation, we actually discover what freedom is, what freedom really feels like. How many of you have ever gotten really, really sick and you wondered, like, wow, what if I was always sick like this? Or maybe there's some people out there listening to this. I know after doing our prayer requests the other night that there were people who have tumors, who have cancer, who are listening to this talk and so forth. My uncle just died of cancer last week. And I talked to him before he died. And one of the things he said to my mom that really stuck with me was, how does one die? I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. But in that moment, there was such peace in the honesty of him recognizing his limited mortal frame. I don't know how to die. I don't know how to let go of this mortal frame. See, the more honest we are, the more we locate the truth, the more free we feel. And paradoxically, we could be in the tiniest prison cell, and it's open pastures, it's open valleys, it's towering, sublime landscapes. So freedom is paradoxical, where when we recognize the healthy limitations in life, and when we allow for apprehension and anxiety to exist and a little bit of trembling, we keep that trembling close to us. Paradoxically, our freedom and our honesty is very close at hand. So this, to me, is the deeper spiritual message of the fear that surrounds this transit. Is it so big? Is the fear so massive? Only in contrast to the size of the egos that we've developed. And who of us have not? You know what I mean? But if we can, in the coming weeks and months, if we can walk through this transit and allow our egos to be diminished if they need to be, allow our fears to speak and be our guides again if they need to be, allow for contraction and crisis to reform us, reshape us, and regenerate us if it needs to happen, then I think that we will find something humbler, sweeter, deeper, and freer than anything we could do by going out and trying to kill or conquer fear, by trying to empower ourselves beyond limitations. So that's my message for today. This is the first part. I want to do a few more parts in this series to give you guys lots to think about. And I'd love to hear your current experience with Saturn Pluto. How has it been weighing on your mind and heart already? What kinds of experiences are you having already? Where is it landing in your chart if you want to share that? And what are you maybe afraid of? And if you're looking at this, I can't always respond to everything in the feeds and the comment sections. Do me this favor. If you see someone that is afraid, that's worrying, that's expressing anxiety, don't try to fix it for them. Don't try to solve it for them. Maybe find a way of virtually putting your arm around them. Just leave a comment, say, you're going to be okay. This is going to be good. You'll be fine. Let's take care of each other too. So thank you guys for listening. Again, remember, last 40 days of the year, I'm fundraising. If you enjoyed this talk, if you get something out of this, if this is your cosmic church service for the day, if this is your sermon from the stars that helps you navigate life and you appreciate the work that I put into it, consider donating and supporting me in 2020. And maybe taking one of my classes if you want to, or picking up a reading through the Kickstarter. Okay, thanks so much, guys. We'll be back again soon. Bye.